Okay, so I think we can start now. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our second lecture of the series, of the second season of the series. We are hosting Fumiya today. He is a professor of robotics at Department of Engineering at the University of Cambridge, and he's the director of Bio-Inspired Robotics. He has received his bachelor and master degree in mechanical engineering at Tokyo University. Today he's going to talk about his work in biologically inspired robotics and embodied AI, this evolutionary robotics and soft robots. The topic is very interesting, and it's one of the pioneers, and he's one of the pioneers in this area. So we are very happy to have him today, and thank you for accepting our invite. Take it away.
Okay, do you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Okay, excellent. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this seminar series, and I'm very excited to meet all these new people in the with the same interest. So I've been working on this research on bio-inspired robotics, basically interested in both biology and robotics, and try to find out what's common in between. And but then there's so many interesting research going on in this area. So I'm very, very excited to share our research with you. And then hopefully we can have a discussion afterwards. And please feel free to stop me anytime if you have any questions on the way. So before starting my lecture today, I just want to do a quick introduction or advertisement of our own event coming up in a couple of weeks' time. So we are organizing this virtual conference of embodied intelligence. This is actually second time. We did it the same thing last year, which was very, very successful. So we decided to do it again. And we usually attract hundreds or actually 1,000 people coming to this event from all over the world. Because it's free and because it's virtual, almost anyone can easily access at least part of it. Then we have an incredible lineup of speakers, so all the experts of robotics, neuroscience, and biology, philosophy, and material science, and so on and so forth. So I think many of you should be interested in one way or the other this kind of event. So please feel free to visit our website, embodied-intelligence.org, and then you can have a free registration. And if you have anything to present over there, you're more than welcome to present your work, and looking forward to having you, as many people as possible, to discuss this big area of exciting area of embodied intelligence research altogether. Okay, so let me start with my lecture with one video that I always start with. So, so this is a video of a kind of famous dog called Faith. This dog is famous because it's a bipedal dog, right? So this dog was born without front legs, unfortunately. But unfortunately, the owner of this dog managed to taught her how to survive without front legs. And I've been using this YouTube video for many, many years now because this is so inspiring and at the same time shocking. So when I was 10 years ago, 10, 20 years ago, I have been working on leg locomotion of robots. But when we watched this video, I was almost, I was shocked because we had never ever built robots with the same level of adaptability. So if you design the robots to locomote in 4 legs, there's no chance this robot can survive if chop off some of the legs, right? So that's why I was really, really interested in how we can do our robotics in a different way, such that they can be in the same similar level of adaptability biological systems. And so this is the kind of ultimate goal of our robotic research in the end, inspired from nature. But then I studied a little bit about biology. Okay, how on earth this is possible in biological system? And this is the main topic of our lecture today. So one of the most interesting, exciting, and astonishing things in the biology is this slide. That every single one of us is actually start our life with a single cell, right? And this single cell becomes, after 10 or 20 years, a bag of 10 to the 13 cells. So this scalability is incredible. Like, we cannot really think of it even, that this level of scalability, growing from such a small system to such a big system in the end. And the size is one thing. The size and number is one thing. But another thing is the diversity of cells. Like, one single cell becomes all different kind of cells, including brain, skin, and muscles, and internal organs, and so on and so forth. So this diversity is another really interesting thing. But what we really need to understand is the process of single cell to such a large organism. But most of the things are actually happening before we are born, right? So before we are born, it's a fetus. Our body becomes bigger, like about 10 to the 10th size. And then from there, we grow about 1,000 times. But this, dynamics is really, really interesting, that we need to understand the fundamental underlying mechanism of this. And all this, mechanical structure is never be static, right? Even if you're grown up, our body is continuously changing, like 100 million cells are changing every minute. So by the time I finish my talk after 1 hour, my body, I'm going to be a completely different person, right? So to speak. So this dynamics of a mechanical body is really, really interesting. And this is the origin of our adaptability and intelligence and so on and so forth. And another side of this growth process is the amount of information we need to build our body, right? If you look at genome in human DNA, it contains about 700 megabytes of information, which is incredibly small compared to the considering the complexity of our mechanical body. And just do a simple math, dividing 10 to the 13 cells divided by 700 megabytes. Basically, 1 bit of information in our genome is in charge of design of 1,800 cells, and that's really another interesting thing, that the design information itself is not dictating all the design developmental process, but actually the physical process that is guided by genome information is really the key to understand how our body is made. And that's something we really want to understand ultimately as robotics engineers, and how we can build robots in this kind of framework is one of the ultimate challenge of robotics, I think. And then, so yeah, I think, so this is obviously a 100-year research theme, and I don't think I can solve this problem while I'm alive. But one of the really significant challenge, what we need to think about, is what we call this complexity challenge. How we can increase the complexity of our robot body on the one hand, but at the same time, how we can increase the task complexity by using this complex robot. So this XY diagram is kind of, very abstract, but still it tells us a lot about our challenges. So, most of our robots are actually very complex, right? We have thousands of parts and components to make one single humanoid or other complex robot. So those are often very complex, more complex than, biological features. And they can do quite a lot of things compared to the little babies that totally incapable of doing anything until grow up for a couple of some years. So what we are doing in robotics today is like this level, like a complexity. You can do some level of complexity, but what these robots can do is considerably small if compared to what adult humans can do. So what we want to do is somewhere along this line, But what we do today, robotics is not really comparable to what humans can do. So we really need to think about different ways of building robots so that we can do something comparable to biological systems. So the complexity is a key keyword that we need to address in our research. So the complexity, what does it mean complexity? It's not easy to define, but we can, for now, we can just say that the complexity is number of degrees of freedom, or number of sensors, or number of actuators, or some dynamical capabilities of mechanical systems. And then the complexity of task is something beyond manipulation, locomotion. We need to do creative constructions of systems and so on. Both of this, the challenge of the body and task complexity, we need to think about in the long run. So what we learn from biological self-organization, right? So if you look at how we ourselves start with one cell to become adult, compared to our robots today, so the scalability and complexity is really, really different. So if we want to go to the level of biological systems, we cannot build robots by hand. We cannot design piece by piece and assemble piece by piece, but we need some sort of automated self-organization process so that the robots can actually assemble itself and grow itself. And also the growth has to come with the precision and robustness, because this is really scalable system. Like we need to think about 10 to the 10 scales growth rather than just a couple of times bigger. Diversity is another thing. So morphological dynamics, mechanical diversity is incredible. That we have sensor, motor, computers, energy source, all of things that have to be implemented in the material level rather than some artificial components. And that's something we need to think about. And moreover, the environment plays an important role. It's not just systems we have to build, but we need to think about how the system grows, the environment in which the system grows. And that's the key information, the key components of the growth process, and the environment is part of the program, how we grow and learn things. And that's what we learn from nature. Okay, so let's look at how biology actually works. So one of the topics that we're really interested in is how our body actually grows inside our mother's womb. So at the beginning, we start with a really, really tiny single organism like this. So in the fingertip, you don't even see it at the beginning. But the interesting thing is that from this level of organism, we already have a nervous systems and the other mechanical systems. And these are kind of couple each other. So this green components in this little creature is actually nervous system. So nervous system are there since the beginning of our life. And then as we grow old, our brain grows together with everything else in our bodies. Actually, brain composed of quite significant part of our body. But then we have all sort of complexity, complex mechanical system over there. And then after 9 week, 10th week, it becomes almost looks like a humans. And then by the time we grow, we're born, it looks like the ordinary baby. So if you look at this, it's really, really incredible how the mechanical structure changes. Especially at the early stage of our life, and the brain and the body are completely different structure, completely different architecture. But then they have to grow together so that they can work together hand in hand. And that's the process that we usually don't understand as an engineers or robotics designers in particular. Like we usually build body and brain separately and try to put them together afterwards. But that's not actually the case in the biological system. So that's why we started interested in how we can think of building our robots in a biological way. And that's one of the things I want to start with at the beginning. So one of the first problem we worked on is the problem of so-called the reflex behaviors in human motor control. So if you look at our body, our motion of the body, the motion is triggered by muscle activities. But muscle activities are usually not directly triggered by our central brain, but most of the signals are actually coming from our backbone spinal cord. And the spinal cord has many neural circuits over there. And we have a lot of close communication between muscles and spinal cord. And usually, lots of biologists or other neuroscientists treat this spinal cord neural circuits as hardwired circuits, right? Because this one you cannot really control, cannot change or learn especially when you grow older. But actually, this has to also grow when we're really young, especially before birth. So what we're interested in how we can think of this kind of spinal circuit growth during our developmental process, especially before birth. And this is particularly important because most of our daily behavior primitives, such as myotapic reflex or reciprocal inhibition or withdrawal reflex, all these basic circuits are already there when we're already born, right? When we're born. So we're just interested in how this kind of thing can actually grow, self-organized by itself, can be learned in the self-organizing process. And because this is really the fundamental behavior primitives that we need to think about. So, obviously one of the important things is how the embodiment plays a role, right? Because there's no real the learning mechanism at this level. Like there's no sense, think, act cycle happening in the higher level of the brain, but everything is happening in the very low level muscle spinal cord interactions. That's one of the first things we looked at. So we were lucky to work with this Mark Bromberg from University of Iowa in the United States, and he's an expert of spinal cord reflexes. And we worked together how we can prove this, the hypothesis called muscle twitches hypothesis. So the problem we are looking at is how the muscle activities is related to a lot of neurons, activities of lots of neurons. And from central brain point of view, we don't really know which neurons are connected to what muscles. And we can actually do a lot of different kind of control through the fully connected neural network. But somehow we need to figure out this connection. So our hypothesis here is that how the muscle twitches play the role. So when we're sleeping, or even we are awake, our muscles are randomly activated from time to time, and especially this kind of twitch activities are more active during the sleeping or before birth. So even the fetus before birth showing this behavioral muscle twitches, and we're trying to figure out whether this kind of muscle twitches play a role to develop early stage motor control. So Mark did most of the neuroscience work, and I don't really know much about the experiment that he did. Basically what he did is measuring the muscle activities together with the behavior of winds by using motion capture and so on, how the motor neurons and sensory neurons activities together with the body motions are correlated to each other. And that's as much as they could do from biology experiments. But from our point of view, robotics engineering approaches to understand all this orchestration of sensor motor coordination, we actually did the simulation model based on our understanding of biological systems. So what we did is basically putting them all together so we know how the neuron works. We can put the motor neuron, sensor neuron together with an artificial neural network, use the Hebbian learning rule, which is probably the most well-known biological learning rules. And then we also know the mechanical muscle model. like how muscle actually works passively and actively together. So we put all these things together, and then on top of that, we have sensors that a muscle have a muscle spindle and Golgi tendon organ that measure the forces as well as displacement of muscles and so on. And we put all the known models together and see how the correlation-based learning, the Hebbian learning, works in such a configuration. And obviously, most important thing is the spontaneous motor activity. So this is a muscle twitch model that we feed into the motor system and see how the correlation-based learning can pick up some relationship between sensory information and motor information. In this way, we can actually do a systematic understanding of how sensor motor coordination as well as muscle twitches are related to each other. So what we did is a very simple system. So we think of the simplest robots ever, right? We can think of the single arm connected to one pin joint. So this pendulum can go right and left in a passive way. But then we think of the simple motor as a muscle. So motor 1 and motor 2 connect to the limb through the cable. So this motor can pull this cable, but not push. And the same with the other motors. And each of the motor has the muscle sensors and the Golgi tendon organs that can measure the displacement and force acting on this tendon. And then we can also have some exteroceptive sensor, like a tactile sensor. When it touches something, we can feel something so that it can be reflected the motor actions. So when we have connections like this and we just randomly move this arm back and forth, you can already see the relationship between motor action and the sensor activity. So let's say we have the motor 1 has a small twitch with a spike here. And then obviously this twitch can induce the physical motion in the sensor side. So one sensor is pulled and the other side is also, the other side is pushed in different directions. And then we have a little oscillation on the deformation sensor. If you have a force sensor over here, one of the muscles feel the force. One of the tendon can feel the force, but the other tendon is not activated because this part is more slack. And then if you have some fluid or some air or whatever in the some mediums in the space, you can actually feel some the tactile information in exteroceptive sensor. So we can actually see a lot of correlation because of the embodiment of the body and sensor and motor together. And that's actually the baseline of the robot can actually learn something out of this kind of interaction. So at the beginning, we have a motor sensors fully connected to each other, but just doing some muscle twitches, random actions in one muscle after another, then some of the important correlation can be picked up because of the correlation-based learning, such as Hebbian learning. And then this kind of connection can be strengthened and automatically reinforced because of the embodiment and the basic rules of Hebbian learning. So this is really interesting because everything is self-organized. We don't have to worry about the configuration of the program behind the motor and sensor coordination, but all this relationship between sensor and motor are correlated to. Correlation can be picked up automatically. So this is a kind of starting point. And then we can actually scale this up very in various ways. So we start with one joint with the 2 muscles, but we can also do the 2 joints with the 4 muscles and the 8 sensors. And we can also do the 2 joint, 8 muscles, and the 16 sensors, and so on and so forth, right? So we don't have to worry about programming of it because the correlation can be automatically picked up without really worrying about anything else. That's a kind of interesting thing that self-organization can be used to learn, pick up some correlation of the sensor motor coordination. So what if we scale up to more complicated system, right? So in this case, we have a more biologically plausible structure of muscles. So we have 8 muscles in 2 joint configuration. Let me just stop the video first. So 2 joints with 8 muscles, and the muscles are sometimes very complex, right? Some of the muscles are connected over 2 joints, some of the 1 joint, and all these muscles are connected in different ways. Therefore, the muscle sensor activities are very different depending on how motor actually works. So the sensor motor coordination here looks a lot more complex than previous one because this is nonlinear relationship between motion and the sensor activities. But all of this complex relationship between sensor and motor can be automatically picked up because of the self-organization process. So at the beginning of this video, we have the muscle twitch experiment, right? So one muscle is activated at once. And then, so this is the learning phase that the one during this activation of muscles, the robot can pick up this correlation. But once this kind of correlations are picked up, this can be used for hopping behaviors like this. When it's thrown in the air, it can actually do a reaction of the muscles automatically. So this is the kind of basic principles how we can do a bottom-up learning of a very basic motion by using engineering principle. We still don't know whether this is actually the mechanism the biological systems use. But the reflex is a really interesting, important question that the roboticists actually don't know much about today. So there are a lot of other interesting biological bioengineering research. For example, there's Helmut Geyer and Hugh Hare made a really nice work about how bipedal walking can be based on the reflex-based activities. And usually, when we build robots for walking, we never use reflexes, right? Because the reflexes are sort of complicated. But this is how our body reacts to the complex environment, and the complexity of the reflexes are the key to understand our basic motions. And this is something we can start investigating because of this computational capacity in neural network and so on and so forth. Okay, so far so good. Like we talked about the simulation of complex motion control, sensor motor control. But that's a kind of starting point of our research, like how we can deal with the complexity of motor control in spinal cord level. But if we work on the mechanical part of it, right? The mechanical growth is a real challenge from bio-inspired robotics. So we also have been looking at how we can do our mechanical design of robots more dynamic. So obviously, we need to think of some sort of mechanical growth or mechanical evolution of our robotic system. So that's why we started thinking about, okay, what if we start thinking about the concept of robot genome? So the robot genome is basically a sequence of information that can be translated into the physical robots through the phenotyping process. And then once we have a robot, and then we need to do some sort of selection or reproduction process so that we can update the genome for the dynamic evolution of the body. So this kind of loop is a real holy grail, so to speak, for the bio-inspired robotics, and that's what we have been thinking about, how we can actually do such a thing, right? And the key point is that we need to go back and forth between the information world as a design information of genome, and then actually need to physically build mechanical robots based on this information in genome. So, and then this physical robots behavior can be translated back to the genome afterwards. So that's the back and forth between information world and the physical world is the really key challenge. So that's why a significant amount of time of our research has been invested to build the mother, or what we call mother robot. So the mother robot is a robot system that can actually interface between the information world and the physical robots. And that's, I just want to introduce you in the next few minutes. So the breakthrough of this mother robot research was really about how what kind of materials are available. So we are really lucky that we found this interesting material, the hot melt adhesive. This is nothing more than hot glue, right? I think you have it in your home. You can buy it in any DIY shops. But this material is incredible in the sense that it's very well engineered. We can control the material properties, the Young's modulus, the softness, rigidity, very well, depending on the temperature. And we can also control the adhesiveness and so on. And we can actually we can glue almost any materials from stone to plastic to metals and so on, as long as it's not wet. So this is a kind of interesting material that we started thinking about how we can use these materials for interesting mother robot research. So the first thing we did is basically we started doing a 3D printing of this material. So this is the hot glue, hot melt adhesives put in the specialized end effector robot manipulator. So this robot is able to do the 3D printing of structure. It's not only 3D printed, but you can use this material as a glue. So 3D printed structure can be put together into a kind of complex mechanical structure by gluing them. And then, so this robot can actually do construction of many different kind of structures by doing 3D printing and gluing. So this is a demonstration that the robot can automatically change its own end effector for different kind of tasks, such as scooping water or picking up pebbles, picking up a large object, and so on, right? So this is a kind of demonstration how material of a hot melt adhesives can be used for dynamic change of mechanical structure of robots. So that's a kind of starting point of our research. So this is the first demonstration we did. But of course, the design of this end effector was given by human beings, even though all the building process and the exchange process, mechanical components are done automatically, but the design itself was given by humans. So the next challenge is how the robot can design its own body automatically without human intervention. And that's the idea of the physical robot evolution by using a mother robot. So this is the next version of mother robots that has the glue end effector, but also the gripper that can pick and place all different components. This robot is able to assemble large diversity of structure by assembling few components, glue them together. So in this case, this robot is making a mother robot is making small child robot. This mother robot can make different kind of child robots so that you can explore the design space by trial and error manner. So here, the challenge is how we can define genome. So this is a robot genome we actually use. So the mother robots interpret this information of module type and construction process or motor control parameters. And then depending on what genome we have, this mother robot assemble small child robots like this. And just changing these numbers, the child robot can be very different, right? So this is one of the evolutionary experiments that the mother robot can make 10 different kind of design of child robots and measure the locomotion performance, how fast the child robot can move. And if the child robot is performing well in terms of locomotion speed, then we can create a lot more robots based on that design and generating the second generations and continue repeating this process all the time. And then usually you see the improvement of performance based on the evolutionary process, the basic selection of fittest.
This is really cool. Can I ask a couple of questions just to clarify?
Of course.
Because I'm from a very different background. What are these blocks made of?
Yeah, thank you. So there are two types of block over here. One of them is small one, and the other one is bigger one. And the bigger one has the motors and sensors inside, so it can actually move by itself, right? And the smaller one is just a passive block, just a mechanical structure. So depending on how you put them together, this robot can actually move differently. So this big box has a motor and sensors and batteries, controllers, and so on. And that's why this child robot is able to move, right? So that's what we call this robotic cells, right? So to speak. I hope that answered to your question.
Yes, it did. And then, so this is basically a genetic algorithm that is that the robot is actually performing that genetic algorithm, right?
That's right.
And then, can you explain what? I think you mentioned something about the speed, but how does the scoring work? How is the scoring? Like giving the scores to each of these genes done automatically, or is there like a manual annotation involved?
So Mother Robot has actually a camera sitting in the back of this experimental arena, right? So the camera is doing computer vision analysis of this child robot and recording the trajectory of the child robot automatically, and then analyze how far it moves by using a computer vision algorithm. So it's all automated, and that's why we can run long experiments without human intervention, right? That's a cool thing.
This is really, really cool. I have just one more question. And then it uses that glue that you mentioned earlier to connect these blocks together. Can you point me which part of the video is that gluing happening?
Okay, so if you, as soon as this robot pick up two cubes, and then it's just moving around, and then introduce another cube over here, and now it's put the glue on top of it so that you can connect these two cubes together, right? So now is a glue time, and then we connect them, right?
This is very interesting. And what happens if the gluing doesn't work? For example, if the point of contact is very little and the gluing fails, would that be considered, like, what happens to that element, and how would you score it?
That's a very good point. So for example, if you look at all these pictures, there is some missing picture over here, for example, right? So this is the failure of building process. So some processes are more difficult to build than others. And in that case, it's likely to fail. So this kind of a failure of building process should be negatively reinforced. So therefore, this robot is automatically kicked out from the evolutionary process.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is really, really cool. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. So this is a really exciting research. And then one of the most exciting things is what kind of things come out from evolution process, right? So these are some of the coolest robots we found from evolutionary search. And sometimes usually we have a very small robots like this. Smaller robots are easier to build and unlikely to fail. So these are lots of robots there are lots of robots like this in evolution. But on the other hand, the bigger robots are more difficult to build, but it can move faster and longer distance. So this is actually the trade-off between small robots versus large robots. And all of these kind of things can be automatically generated by the evolutionary process. So the human is not involved in design process of this, and that's why it's really interesting. And all we need to do is basically providing these cubes and the genetic structure, but then everything else is automated. So the largest experiment we did is like 500 robots automatically generated in 4 week time. So 2 students are kind of running this day and night. The only thing is not really automated is the cleanup of the failure case. When the mother robots fail to build, then a human has to help to disassemble or clean up the mess. And that has to be done by human manually. But otherwise, everything else is automated. And this is kind of automated research project. And we usually observe some form of fitness increase because this is the selection of the fittest. So this is kind of obvious results, but sometimes it's a higher rate of improvement. Others, it doesn't change much, but you usually see some steady increase of the fitness function. But the most interesting thing out of this experiment is actually some of the outcome of these behaviors are very unpredictable and difficult for humans to design. So most of the robots actually show the periodic behavior like this, right? So we have some shuffle behavior like this, and someone is very periodic, one step after another. This one is rotating around, but still is moving forward. So this is a kind of all periodic. But the most interesting type of kind of behaviors are this non-periodic chaotic behavior. So we don't really know why this robot is moving forward because it uses many different chaotic patterns to move forward, but still it's moving forward, right? So, and that's why the evolutionary process can leave this kind of design in the pool of the generation. But this kind of design is possible because the mother robot is the heuristic design process, right? The mother robot doesn't really understand why this system actually works, but just try and error and just leave the functional system over there. And this kind of design is really difficult for human designers to think about because we don't understand why this is working, but still it works. So yeah, this is a kind of research we have been doing, started about 10 years ago, and the many different ways how we do. And this is an introduction of the 3D printing process in the locomotion behavior. So basically the same research of the evolution of the locomotion robots, but by integrating soft materials for 3D printing. And again, it's quite interesting. There's so many different ways. This is very simple robots, right? Have only one motor, but the soft deformable material can interact with the environment in many different ways. And that's why it has so many different ways of moving forward. And that's the kind of research we have been doing in the last 10 years or so. So yeah, well, this is a kind of introduction of our physical evolutionary robotics, and this is a really exciting research area that robots can actually build something. A robot can be creative, building something different every time rather than repeating the same thing over and over again. So that's a kind of new way of doing robotics from now on. But obviously, one of the real challenge for the next step is how we can do the robot intelligence at the material levels. And that's why the soft robotics is a kind of the playground for our research in the last 10 years, because we can actually introduce so many different kind of materials for diversity of robots. So far, all of the evolved robots has, in one way or the other, very similar, but the diversity comes from the material variation. So we have been doing a lot of material level research because soft deformation is the origin of all the embodied intelligence. Looking at muscles or heart, lungs, lens, skin, whiskers. All of these things are originated in the formation of the soft materials. And there are lots of soft functional materials available for soft actuators, soft sensors, soft electronics, soft computers, and soft batteries, right? So we can actually do the evolution of all this, the functionality, including batteries and computers, by using the soft materials. And that's going to be the breakthrough for the physical evolutionary robotics. And on top of that, we can actually do the complex adaptation based on the soft materials. And that's what we have been interested in. So there are lots of innovations in the last 10 years from very application-oriented, medical devices, or drones, deformable drones, or wearables, or sensors or actuators. There are many, many different kind of research going on in this area. But in the end, what we're really interested in is how we can make our materials more intelligent, right? So the material design is one of the next big research challenge that we're interested in. So one of the things we're doing is how we can do the deformable materials. So have some sort of soft elastomer. It can be silicon, can be natural rubber, or some soft deformable materials, and that can be mixed with some functional materials like electrically conductive compounds, and put them together, and then we can make a functional deformable materials. Then we can make a deformable sensor, the deformable computers, and all that kind of thing. So this is a really complicated material science research. We're not doing too much materials research, but I think some of them are really exciting. And one of our recent achievement is how we can do the self-healing conductive elastomer. Right? So this is electrically conductive, and it can be 3D printed, it can be self-healed. So here is the 3D printer that we made out of these materials. And we can actually put many different shapes of the sensors and put it on the graph, and we can measure the deformation by wiring, hooking up to the converter devices. And one of the interesting thing is that 3D printing will allow us to make all different kinds. So this is the pneumatic actuator. So we 3D print this kind of structure, and then we give air, and then it can move. Now this material is a self-healing, so we can actually cut through this actuator so that it's to leak the air. It doesn't work as an actuator, but because this is self-healing materials, it can automatically recover from the damage on the actuators, and that will allow the system to actually do not only sensing, but also actuating, but also self-healing. So this is so many things, so many different functions can be put together into a mechanical structure. So all of these things are kind of manually built, but we can see how this kind of material can be used for 3D printing, as well as functionalizing through electrical signal. So this can be neurons, or it can be tactile sensor, it can be some sort of mechanical structures, and we can use this for many different kinds of things. So yeah, we have been doing many different things. One of the challenges that all these materials we can put in high density, so we can put so many. So in this case, we're making a human finger-like structure, right, in the robotic arm. But this finger structure can contain a lot of sensors inside. So each single, this black line over here is the conductive materials, and you can use this as a sensor. But the challenge is that if you have so many of them in a soft deformable structure, the electrical signals are so messy and so complicated, and there's lots of drift and lots of noise in the system. So it's usually difficult to program this kind of things, but luckily we have all this in AI technique, right? So LSTM network is the neural network that can, convolutional neural network technology that can pick up temporal information to learn complex interaction between input and output. And we can actually train neural network to do a good force control of this kind of soft robots. And also the 3D printing is a really interesting challenge, that how we can combine different materials. So in this case, we tried to use the rigid materials and soft materials together so that it can work just like our hands. Our hand has an anisotropic deformation profile. Some direction it's soft, some direction it's soft. And this kind of design is the next challenge. We can use AI to design complex structure like this. Okay, so I think I just want to leave some time for discussions. I just trying to conclude my presentation over here. That what we are really interested in is embodied intelligence. So embodied intelligence, we understood, is how we can build a physical system that can interact with the environment in interesting ways. So we have a very complex body morphology, sensor and motor system, and that has a lot of complexity that interact with the task environment. But this kind of the physical interaction with the environment is really the rich foundation for the brain to grow over time. So if you don't have a complex, interesting body, interesting brain cannot evolve, and that's our kind of the foundational idea of embodied intelligence. And that's why we started doing soft robotics, because this is the only way we can make a complex morphology, complex body dynamics like a biological systems. And that's the starting point of our research. But then we are really in interesting timing in the history that we have also the AI machine learning techniques available for our research. So how we can put this AI machine learning technologies on top of complex body in order to make our robots more biologically plausible or more intelligent like biological systems. And this way, we can actually make our robots hopefully in the next level. Okay, so we have a lot of collaborators, obviously. Have so many PhD students, postdoc helping us for this research, and as well as the sponsorship from the companies and governments to make us allow us to do all this research, interesting, exciting research. I just want to acknowledge all of them. And obviously, I couldn't go too much into details of technology, but if you're interested, please feel free to visit our website, parallab.org, and you can find lots of videos and also publications over there. Or otherwise, you can join this Embodied Intelligence Conference in 2 weeks' time, where we can have a more interesting discussions over there. Okay, and I'd like to stop it here. Thank you very much for your attention, and yeah, I'm ready for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the interesting talk, and yeah, very interesting results. Do we have any questions from the audience? So I have, so first of all, are you familiar with the works of Josh Bongard and Nick Cheney?
So I know Josh very well because we have been sitting together while we are doing PhD.
Oh, that's really interesting. Because yeah, I think like your work reminded me of, he gave a talk a couple of months ago in our lecture series. And I think your work reminded me of theirs because they're basically doing somehow similar ideas, but in micro level, microscopic level. So it was really interesting to see if there is any intersection between these two line of research, and whether there is any, whether you can actually like use the models that they have trained and built in microscopic level and bring it to like the level of abstractions that you have, and whether any of that would work or not.
Absolutely. So, you know, the difference between what Josh is doing and myself is Josh is more focusing on evolutionary algorithm perspective, like how we can come up with an interesting mechanism in the algorithm level, whereas our interest is focus is more on the physically building process, right? Because these two things have to come together. We cannot really walk independently, because the algorithm has to be somehow related to how actually the systems are built. And these are kind of corroborating to each other. So in this way, we are really complementing to each other. But at the same time, we're going toward very similar directions in the end.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, do we have any other questions? Okay, great. Thank you so much for accepting our invite again. And this was a really interesting talk, and we really hope to hear more from your line of research soon in the future.
Okay, thank you very much for your interest. Yeah. And yeah, we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.